It is tragic that the United States has become a predator to our closest friends. And it will take a generation to repair the damage, the collapse of trust that President Trump's policies have enacted.
Hi, I'm Fergus Macphee, and welcome to the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday to Friday, on our YouTube channel, and you can also listen and follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for the Trump Report in your podcast app. Joining me today is Kori Schake, Senior Fellow and Director of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Kori, welcome to the Trump Report.
Thanks, Fergus.
Thank you for joining us today. Now, I did an interview yesterday where I spoke to Rick Wilson, and at the time, all of the signs were pointing to an imminent kind of US strike on Iran. Over 24 hours later, that still hasn't happened, and Donald Trump is speaking in a different tone. He says that he's been assured that the killing has stopped, and Iran, of course, have confirmed that protester Irfan Soltani will not be sentenced to death. Is this a permanent road back from the US, do you think?
It sounds like it, and it's one more example of President Trump wanting a television and social media moment instead of actually following through on a policy that he had advocated.
So you think...
I think he drew a red line and he walked away from it. And why in the world would he believe a commitment from the brutal mullahs running Iran that they won't kill more of their citizens when they have killed well on 10,000 already?
So it's been a while on this show since we heard the term TACO. Are you saying this is a case of that?
I am. President Trump is going to try and claim that his threat talked the Iranian government away from being a repressive force on its people, which, first of all, is not happening. And second of all, is a betrayal of the promise he made to them, encouraging the protests, that the U.S. would have the protesters back. That is not what he has done. What he has done is cut a deal with the Iranian government over the heads of people pleading for individual dignity and political liberty.
So what would it be in that deal that he might have cut with Iran?
An empty promise that they're not going to sentence to death the thousands and thousands of protesters who they are rounding up and committing violence against right now.
So Lindsey Graham, he doesn't speak for the president, but he put a tweet out essentially kind of calling out a lot of headlines, which are saying almost this exact thing. And he said that the circumstances around the necessary decisive action to be taken against the evil Iranian regime have nothing to do with President Trump's will or determination. Nothing could be further from the truth. Quite the opposite. Stay tuned. Would you put any weight at all to that?
No, but I think the fundamental character of the Trump administration is that the president is erratic and creating international chaos in ways that are damaging to American security and to allies' security.
Do you think there's any kind of grand plan or strategy within that? I've spoken to quite a few different contributors on this who some say he's making it up as it goes along. Some say this is all part of a sort of massive foreign policy blitz.
I think the nature of the Trump administration is ill-disciplined indulgence by the president, and based on the last person he talked to on the golf course or which of the contending ill-tempered tribes within the administration he wants to placate at any particular moment. I mean, it's not a great look for a great power to be this unreliable.
There are some unconfirmed reports from sources within the US that the US wasn't actually militarily ready to strike Iran, which is why they've kind of rode back. Our colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, they're reporting that there are no current aircraft carrier groups in the Middle East, partly because of the previous operation we've seen in Venezuela. A lot of them are in the Caribbean. Is it a case that, the Dom Roe doctrine in the Western Hemisphere, they've kind of forgotten about the Eastern Hemisphere?
So, what they have done is bring a lot more military power than is necessary for anything we would want to accomplish in the Caribbean. And that has denuded not just the Mediterranean and the Middle East, but they're moving an aircraft carrier from patrolling waters off of China. So, do they really actually think that China is a less important American national security concern? It's not even what their own strategy says. So the notion that there's some strategic thinking behind what the president is doing, I think, is just not, it has no basis in fact.
Hmm. If that is true about, I think I count 12 aircraft carriers were currently in the Caribbean. If it is true and they are sort of running militarily stretched for resources, does that not pose serious concerns for their future ambitions? You've got Venezuela, you've got Greenland, Russia, Iran.
Of course, but the President Trump's uses of force are standoff, one-time only strikes, as though, we fire a bullet and the war's over. But of course, that's not how any of this works. You don't create sustained policy implementation that way. You don't change enemies' calculations that way. And you don't effectively connect the tactical use of military operations to any kind of political objectives that way.
Over your career, I believe you've worked in the US Department of Defense and also on the National Security Council. When you're dealing with sort of big decisions like this, like a potential strike on a foreign military power, what sort of conversations are happening? And do you have any faith those conversations are happening within the administration?
I have no faith those conversations are happening within the administration, because where any military operation ought to begin, politically, strategically, and morally, is with the president identifying what is the political objective we are trying to achieve, and then the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense identifying military plans and objectives that can achieve that political outcome, and then tasking the military with developing those plans, while the State Department and other elements of the government figure out what they can contribute to assist achieving the president's political objectives. But President Trump hasn't identified a political end state he wants to achieve with any of this. And there appears to be no policy coordination process. And the Secretary of Defense is fundamentally incapable of serving the function of connecting the president's political objectives to the military plans. I mean, the last time strikes on Iraq were planned, the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence weren't even included in the conversations.
Wow. I guess would the administration say that their policy end game is that sort of Dom Roe doctrine, Western Hemisphere strategy?
What does that even mean? Right? I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means, because if we want to cede the European landmass, whose countries are our closest allies and the largest investors in the American economy, and in whose economy we are the largest investor, to a Russian sphere of influence, that cedes an enormous amount of political, strategic, and economic interaction. If we're focusing on the Western Hemisphere to the exclusion of Asia, the most dynamic part of the global economy, and where America's most intimidating adversary, China, is operating, like, that's shrinking the United States from a global power to a regional power, and it will be impoverishing to us as well as destabilizing to our security and the security of our closest friends.
Is that shrinking operation already happening in your mind?
Yes, I believe it is. I mean, the policies the Trump administration is enacting, threatening Canada with attack, threatening Denmark's territory of Greenland with attack, these are going to collapse any trust our closest friends have with us. And we need those countries' help for what we are trying to achieve in the world. It's hegemonic suicide, the policies that the Trump administration is carrying out.
Well, one of those policies, I think that leads nicely on to what's happening in Greenland. Because yesterday, several European NATO countries, among them are Germany, the UK, France, and Finland, they sent troops to Greenland, and Denmark says the plan is now to have a more permanent presence of forces there. Now, look, there's not many of them. I think France sent about 15. The UK, I believe, have sent one officer. They've even said that it's not actually to protect it, but it's making a statement. And I guess I wanted to ask you, did you did you ever think that we would see this NATO powers posting their own troops somewhere to supposedly make a point against protecting itself from a fellow NATO ally?
It is tragic that the United States has become a predator to our closest friends. And it will take a generation to repair the damage, the collapse of trust that President Trump's policies have enacted. Britain and the Netherlands are no longer willing to do drug interdiction in the Caribbean with us. The Netherlands and the Nordic countries are restricting the intelligence they share with the United States. We are going to get dumber as a result, and it will be harder for the U.S. to protect ourselves and advance our interests as a result of these ridiculously provocative policies the Trump administration is enacting.
This question is going to sound provocative, and I don't mean it to be, but why should people watching this care about that? Because as far as they've shown, the administration don't really seem to particularly care if they lose Europe or NATO allies.
It's true that the Trump administration doesn't appear to care, but that's because they're terrible strategists. Not only are they not playing four-dimensional chess, they're not playing one-dimensional checkers. The existing international order is the most cost-effective way for the United States to remain safe and prosperous, and they are doing vandalism to it every single day, and it is going to make us less safe. It is going to make harder and more costly everything the United States tries to do in the world. If our European allies throw American bases out because we've become a threat to them, the U.S. can't project power into the Middle East and Asia. It's crazy, the recklessness of Trump policies that take advantage, that assume that our friends have no choice but to help us, because they always have a choice.
In terms of what you just said, they always have a choice. Obviously, we know that ministers from Denmark and Greenland met with Marco Rubio and JD Vance in the White House yesterday. Now, Denmark came out today and said that there's a fundamental disagreement between the two nations. I mean, that's not particularly surprising. I think beforehand, the US left them almost no negotiating room, essentially, before they did it.
So the Trump administration doesn't negotiate. They publicly make outrageous demands that they make no compromises on. That's not negotiation. They are trying to use American power to intimidate our closest friends into outcomes that aren't in either of our interests. It's so reckless and it's so damaging.
So if they don't negotiate, I mean, if we take what they say at face value, is that where this ends then? This ends with an invasion of Greenland?
It sounds like it to me, and it will destroy the NATO alliance, and it will destroy the United States as a force for good in the world. We will become no different and no better than what our harshest critics have claimed we are, and we will deserve it.
I spoke to a guest last week who said that, even if the US does acquire Greenland, it's probably most likely that the next administration or the next president would give it straight back.
I should certainly hope so. The Trump administration's national security strategy says that the sovereignty of states is the principal international guidepost. And yet they would violate it against a treaty ally of the United States. First of all, I would hope Congress would prevent it. Because Congress's passivity is a big part of what has enabled Trumpian overreach in the executive branch. The president shouldn't be able to spend money that Congress hasn't authorized and appropriated. He shouldn't be able to do a whole bunch of things that he is doing. And so Congress needs to step up and do their jobs to prevent catastrophic outcomes for the United States. And I do believe that if the president attempted to do this, Congress would legislate against it. Congress would deny the money. There would not be an authorization for the use of military force by the Congress. And exactly as you say, Fergus, I think the next American administration would come crawling to Copenhagen begging forgiveness and return it, and try to be a better friend to a country that has bled alongside us and been a magnificent ally to us.
You talked about Congress there. We know Denmark don't want this. I think polls showed that people in Greenland aren't that keen either. And there's been 2 polls out in the last 24 hours in the US that show the American public aren't that keen. A Reuters one found only 17% of people supported it, and a CNN poll found that 75% did not support it. So, looking at those numbers, obviously it's only just 2 polls. You would think that, would you think that Congress would also vote against it?
Yes, I do. Because the president's being incredibly reckless, and Congress is going to have to live with the consequences of it. I personally was incredibly heartened that there's a congressional delegation going to Denmark next week to commit the Congress in opposition to the president's policy. We need more of that. We need more Americans speaking up and holding hands with our friends to object to the damage the president is doing.
Things have been a little quiet with Donald Trump on the Russia-Ukraine front. But last night he was speaking to Reuters and he made some comments when he said that Vladimir Putin, I think he's ready to make a deal. Then he moved on to Zelensky and said, I think Ukraine is less ready to make a deal.
This is so outrageous. This is so outrageous. And I think the president is being fundamentally dishonest. He is assisting the Russian war effort, and it will be an historic disgrace that the United States is not assisting Ukraine in restoring its internationally recognized territory and protecting the citizens of that free society against the Russian invasion. I don't have a theory of the case of why Donald Trump is so indulgent of Russian policies when Russia is a danger to us, our closest friends, and to American power across the international order. But it feels like Donald Trump has switched sides and is actually helping the war effort. Vladimir Putin has been refusing peace negotiations for almost 5 years. At what point is it going to be evident, even to the President of the United States, that Russia is the bad guy and we are helping the bad guys?
And it was Vladimir Putin, of course, that rejected that peace deal, which was brokered by the US.
I know. It's so discouraging to see that no amount of data or analysis can make a dent in the president's ignorance and commitment to assist the Russian war effort.
Just while I've got you, I just want to end on the the current situation in Minneapolis? Because it's escalated again today. Donald Trump has threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act over the continued protests. It's not the first time he's done that. Just want to get your reaction.
Yeah, well, the Supreme Court in December ruled that the president lacks both constitutional and statutory authority to have called National Guard in California, Oregon, and Illinois into federal service in support of immigration enforcement. That's a very powerful restriction on the president's executive authority. The only way he can get around that is if he invokes the 1808 Insurrection Act, which gives the president wide authority if there is an invasion, an armed insurrection, or domestic violence or conspiracy occurring. I think it's a very dangerous piece of legislation, and to invoke it over the objection of governors and mayors is a very dangerous use of the president's power. And I very much hope that the politics of doing something so dramatic will prevent him. And if it doesn't, I hope that the courts will weigh in and rule that that the president hasn't met the conditions for invoking the Insurrection Act.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like, from what you described there, that those conditions have been met.
No, I don't believe they have been met. But again, the president has wide authority and in some instances sole authority to make that judgment. That's going to be tested in court if he invokes the Insurrection Act, and it will be a major constitutional and legislative issue.
Do you worry about the future of America domestically?
I very much do. I think there has not been this large a domestic political crisis since 1867. And it's so shocking that, we're destroying America's position in the world, and we are doing great damage to our democracy. And for no reason. We are safe, we are prosperous. Governing over diversity is hard, and we're not half bad at it. And so the destructiveness of the Trump administration, the willful creation of chaos and disorder is a tragedy to me.
You said it would take years to kind of rebuild international relations. What about on the home front?
So I am hopeful that on the home front, the legacy of the Trump administration will be constraints, legal constraints, court decisions that restrain executive power and restore the balance of congressional supremacy and the authorities of governors and localities not to be intruded upon by willful executive authority.
Kori, we really appreciate your time. Kori Schake, thank you so much for joining us on the Trump Report.
It was a pleasure, my friend.